Welcome to Artificiality, brought to you by the founders of Sonder Studio. Artificiality is a podcast dedicated to understanding the emerging community that is humans and machines. We take the latest in the human side, decision science, psychology, and design, and put it together with advances in artificial intelligence and big data so that you can understand how to work better with machines and your fellow humans. We're on this learning journey too, so we strive to find the frontiers, to ask the best questions, and to stay curious. We interview some of the top minds working at the intersection of humans and machines and make sure to have a few laughs along the way. At Sonder Studio, we believe digital transformation is actually about people, and we're on a mission to empower people to make better decisions, design better things, solve better problems, and design better intelligence. We do this through culture change management, speaking in workshops, and human-centered product design. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com. You can learn more about making better decisions in our book, Make Better Decisions: How to Improve Your Decision-Making in the Digital Age. The book is an essential guide to practicing the cognitive skills needed for making better decisions in the age of data, algorithms, and AI. Please check it out at mbd.zone, on Amazon, or in your favorite bookstore. If you enjoy our podcasts, please subscribe and leave a positive rating or comment. Sharing your positive feedback helps us reach more people and connect them with the world's great minds. How will AI change our jobs? Will it replace humans and eliminate jobs? Will it help humans get things done? Will it create new opportunities for new jobs? People often speculate on these topics, doing their best to predict the somewhat unpredictable. To help us get a better understanding of the current state of humans and AI working together, we talked with Tom Davenport and Steve Miller about their recently released book, Working with AI. The book is centered around 29 detailed and deeply researched case studies about human-AI collaboration in real-world work settings. What they show is that AI isn't a job destroyer, but a technology that changes the way we work. Tom is Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College, visiting professor at Oxford Saïd Business School, fellow of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, and senior advisor to Deloitte's AI practice. He is the author of The AI Advantage and co-author of Only Humans Need Apply and other books. Steve is Professor Emeritus of Information Systems at Singapore Management University, where he previously served as founding dean of the School of Computing and Information Systems and vice provost for research. He is co-author of Robotics Applications and Social Implications. Tom and Steve, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're excited to talk to you about your new book.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
So perhaps we could start with what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I'll start, and Steve can say why he was interested. I'd co-authored a previous book called Only Humans Need Apply, Winners and Losers in the Age of Smart Machines, and it really was mostly about this issue of augmentation, that we wouldn't see large-scale automation. We would see a lot of humans and smart machines working collaboratively alongside each other. And I had some examples, but I didn't really emphasize them all that much in that book. And so I thought it'd be great to have a book of examples of people who are working with AI on a daily basis. And I started it as a little series in Forbes, which I write for, called The Future of Work Now. And I think it was about that time that I started talking with Steve about it. So what got you interested, Steve, in joining me in this quest?
Well, like Tom, I had done some previous publishing, in this case a magazine article on AI, more augmentation than automation. So that goes back to 2018, and I had done some examples, things that were happening in Singapore, like at Changi Airport and some other places. So I was interested in practical case studies of applications where you could pick up some of the nuances. And then something happened where it put Tom and I in touch with each other about something else he was writing. And that led to a conversation. And Tom already had the idea for the book. So the book was Tom's idea. And he had the vision of this series of short stories and using his column as sort of like an intermediary stepping stone to build up in that direction. And we had similar interests. Tom obviously has much more experience in working through many, many books, and in that sense, really sort of knows the craftsmanship of how to think these through from the very beginning before you even do it. And I had the interest in the AI deployments and on this issue of augmentation, and that's what led to us coming together.
I think it's a really interesting book because you have so many practical examples in one place, and then sort of key takeaways at the end, which is, it makes it really rich. And augmentation versus automation is a continuing topic. I feel like we've at the very early stages of understanding what's really possible and how to really design for that interface. What were the case studies that got you the most interested or the most surprised about how humans can be augmented by machines?
Well, I'll give one example, and I'm sure Steve will have another or others. I had written previously a little bit about an effort at Morgan Stanley, a big investment and wealth management company, to use AI to recommend investments for its clients. And I think all along they intended for it to not replace but augment the financial advisors that they employ. But when I interviewed a couple of financial advisors for the book, that they actually had a group. Morgan Stanley has these kind of groups of financial advisors that work together. And this was a group in Long Island, New York. And talked to them about it. They made it very clear that it was a useful tool to use machine learning to recommend investments, but it really was in service of the relationship. And Jeff McMillan, the guy who is the head of data and analytics for the wealth management practice, said, we've done some research, and certainly the people who use this system perform better than those who don't. But it's pretty clear that what our clients really care about is that someone is looking out for them. And this system gives good ideas to send out and suggest to the clients that someone is looking out for them. But it's really the communication and the relationship that matters more than anything else. And I saw that even further. I asked Jeff McMillan once what kind of content was most requested by the financial advisors. And he said, well, I don't think we're going to do this, but they really wanted local sports knowledge that they could share with their clients. So that sort of tells you it's very much a relationship-oriented business.
They wanted the AI to help them with the relationship as much as they did to help parse through the different investment options that are coming from head office. Yeah.
Fascinating. And let me give an example that helps illustrate how some of the same technological capabilities can be deployed in different ways, and it so depends on the business and the market context. All right. So we take the same company, and this is DBS Bank, and we're going to take the same area, which is customer service for the mass retail market. Now, when Tom and I did up this story initially in Tom's column, there were two parts to the story. All right. One part took place in India, where obviously, there are many established banks in India. This bank from Singapore, DBS, came in as a new entrant. And because they came in as a new entrant in 2016, right from the get-go, they went all digital. So they didn't try and compete with branches. Everything was based on the mobile phone. So because everything from the get-go, from the very beginning, was getting people on the on-digital channel, we spoke with them in some depth about how they can then do the monitoring of the customer experience on the channel. Obviously, we all know our own experiences where we have problems with something and we have to call the bank and, can you help me with this and that? I wouldn't say in all instances, but in some instances, because they were doing the real-time monitoring, they could see the trajectory of a customer having some struggles with using some features of the apps, and they could proactively intervene. All right? But this was because everything was all digital from the outset. And then, so there's a case where some aspects of customer service were automated, but then the augmentation and the creation of new work was that now they had a team who would do experiments on how they could do predictive work with those customers and try things that would head off problems. And it became production work to try to experiment with the customer service platform as opposed to a project. So that's augmented work and using AI tools to plan the experiments as well as execute them. Now, what was so rich about this context was the other part of the story, which ended up getting edited out of the book, but it's still part of the interviews Tom and I did, where there was this other market, which was the home market, which was Singapore. And because DBS Bank had acquired a long-standing bank that had like a 100-year history in Singapore, they had customers who had been with them a long time who they just liked to call the bank. If anything happens, that's what they did. They were used to calling the bank because they didn't start from the get-go all digital, right? Their base of experiences, talk to someone at the bank and they'll tell you what to do. And through those interviews that Tom and I did, we were able to see how they were using AI to try and predict for mass market retail. Can we, with enough confidence, make a prediction of why the person is calling? And before we talk to them, offer them some options that we predict are, 70, 80, 90% likely to head off why they're calling us in the first place. And so it's a whole different type of scenario than in the all digital one in India. Nudging people from the physical channels, like the call, the telephone, to the digital. And again, they created this new kind of work that we do mention in the book called customer science, where a team, as part of their production work, is experimenting using AI tools on how to do this nudging and prediction.
I think that's. I'm curious about when you said that the AI is being used in the case in India in the digital channels to actually design the experiments up front. Can you talk a little bit more about that as well?
I think it's fair to say, and please, Tom, comment if you think I'm being inaccurate here. They built up platform tools, and the platforms make it a little more efficient to work with the data flows and to do this. So in they're getting in the data. The AI methods for pattern analysis help them to analyze what's happening, right? To the best that we know, because we only have limited visibility in this, humans were thinking of what is the next experiment that we're doing, but, you do simulations, how will that work? right? Suppose we do this experiment. Can we predict what we do before we unleash it into the wild? So to the extent that AI is being used as part of the experimentation, I would say it's definitely in the mode of augmentation, whereas people are trying to make you're going into an unknown situation. What should we try here?
The reason I was asking was, and it probably did feel like sort of diving down into a tiny little detail, but it sort of piqued my attention around the sort of extra tight coupling between what a person can do when they're sitting in front of their machine and what the AI can guide them and help them make different judgments. So there's sort of micro decisions. That coupling just seemed to be tighter and more detailed. So it was that was sort of the core of my curiosity there.
Tom's got a bunch of examples that he and I have discussed in some other interviews about AI being good at making first cut recommendations. It's probably best for Tom to talk about that.
Yeah, and some of them, Helen, really do have a pretty tight coupling. We wrote one case study about a fundraiser at a university in Arkansas, and it was using a tool called Gravity, which I found out about all of this because one of my former students had been one of the co-founders of this company. But it basically recommends which potential donors to contact next, and also will compose an email reaching out to that donor that is customized to their particular situation. And so I think what it became for the person we featured, the frontline fundraiser, it became basically the tool by which they do their day-to-day work. And it also, if they're going to go on a fundraising trip, it sort of lays out where they should go. And when he does go on the fundraising trip, he's kind of sending messages from the airport, from his mobile phone, that come out of this Gravity system. So it really has become sort of an adjunct to his almost all of his day-to-day tasks. And I asked him, do you feel and see any downside of this? And he said, well, sometimes I feel a little bit chained to my computer, but it's made me so much more effective. And he had a huge amount of detail about how much more he had raised and how many more donors he had relationships with after this system compared to before it.
Yeah. Let me give you one example where, again, both Tom and I sat in on the interview, and it's with the firm called Mandiant that is one of these super high-end, super sophisticated cyber defense, cyber threat analysis. They do a lot of work with the government on when their attacks, are they from known threat groups? Are they from advanced persistent threats, which is a polite way of saying state-sponsored cyber attacks? And one of the fantastic things that came out of that was that prior to them figuring out how to systematize the analysis process, which included an analytic model that then used what you would call some AI methods to help with predictions. In this case, prediction if things are similar to other things. It was very much a craft. They had super experienced people, and intuitively using a tremendous amount of tacit knowledge, they would assess similarities of threat clusters. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of like why that is technically important, but if there's some new threat cluster on your radar screen and you don't know its name, but you can figure out it's actually the same as some threat cluster you've been tracking for 3 years, that allows you to, if you will, inherit a lot of information about their behavior. So that's why they wanted to know if new threat clusters were truly new or sufficiently similar to old things that we can use our prior knowledge. And because they went through the process to use this huge amount of data they had, to then build a systematic model to help them with the predictions of similarity analysis. Let me take a quote that comes out of there that I think gets to the thing. It's previously, this was so expertise-based and sort of tacit and craft-based. If customers asked us to share this kind of knowledge, we were sort of reluctant to go into the details of why we made the assessments on similarity, yes or no. But once we made it model-based and combined that model with our judgment, then we had a systematic way, right? We had a basis for making the decision, so much so that people across the company could use that model concept framework, and we were willing to discuss the results with customers. So it's not just the AI per se, but going down that path led them to systematize their entire approach to the analysis of data and use it as an input to these super experienced threat analysts, that it changed their way of working in a big way. Is that a fair statement, Tom?
Yeah, seemed like it. Certainly our frontline person told us that.
One of the things that I find interesting about a handful of these stories is you can think through, how can an AI be helpful? Is it predictions going to be accurate? Is it going to help us advance the business, et cetera? But then flipping it around and trying to think through what the unanticipated reactions are of the humans on the other side. So thinking about how the Morgan Stanley advisors actually really wanted local sports scores to be able to connect with their customers better. DBS had challenges of understanding when people would actually pick up the phone. We did some work a few years ago with Westpac that had the same sort of reaction, that even the youngest generation were calling the bank to ask a human what their balance was, which is a very counterintuitive response. You think that the totally digital natives would be the happiest to be able to see their balance on their phone, but actually they wanted to talk to a person. So this sort of question of what the AI can do to be helpful is one side of the equation, but we frequently forget about whether the people on the other side actually want the AI to be the one to talk to, right? And I think, Tom, you definitely nailed it with that Morgan Stanley question of the advice can be great from an AI, but the customers seem to really want to talk to a human about that advice. They wanted another person to have that conversation with. And I think that's a really intriguing part of the narratives to pull out of your case studies.
Yeah, I think often there's a general preference for talking with a human, and I think we didn't so much see it in our book research, but I was talking to someone yesterday who was complaining about chatbots, and I think sometimes they can be very well done, as I believe they were at DBS, but in general, I think we all get a little bit frustrated when we can't find a human to talk to. So I think that combination of human intermediation and AI-based help can make things a lot better. But you don't really want to implement AI to get rid of your human call center people. It just doesn't seem to work very well. One of the economists who endorsed our book at MIT calls these so-so technologies that aren't really good enough to replace the existing human capability and don't really lead to any productivity gains at all.
One sort of comment on, Dave, what you just mentioned is when you're in the zone of the standard use case, and when the thing you're trying to do via the digital channel is what it's set up to do, it just flows like magic, right? It makes so many things so much easier and eliminates so many intermediary steps and waiting. But exceptions are not exceptional. Exceptions are very common, as any of us who knows who've had to rearrange airline tickets lately or something like that. There's just such a vast space on, but my situation is a little bit different and a little bit special. So this bit about how to effectively use the machines to handle sort of the known zone of the familiar, and yet how to make it so that when people need some special help, you don't have to go through 10 levels of obstacles to easily get it. And that's one of the big challenges today.
What did you learn about the situation when people are, sort of cognitively overloaded? So the example that's in my head as I'm talking is when you when you go to the doctor and they're spending all their time typing on the computer rather than listening to you. And I'm thinking about what happens in a situation where the human is trying to sort of think about lots of things at one point, or they're cognitively overloaded, or there's time pressure, how AI can help in that situation, especially when it's where there's the possibility of error, the false positive, false negative. It's not just a rule-based AI. It's an AI that is offering predictions that some of them may be true or not true. Did you discover or talk to anyone who had that specific?
I don't know, Steve. Maybe the Good Doctor story is an example of that, where this amazing company based in China called Ping An started out as an insurance company and then rapidly moved into some other businesses, really aggressively using AI to nurture all of them. And they entered the healthcare field, and they decided that, well, we don't really have enough physicians for the Chinese population. So they developed an intelligent telemedicine tool called Good Doctor. And we really looked at just a slice of it. They were extending it to Indonesia, and we talked about the process of entering a new country with it. But they serve in China over 350 million people. Talk about cognitive overload if you had to actually see all of those patients in the traditional format. And so what they do is they have an automated triage system, basically, that asks the patient a number of questions about why they're calling and tries to figure out, do they really need to see a doctor? And if they don't, can they just get some advice, which the system can give, or do they need a prescription, which still requires a doctor? If the doctor needs to give them a diagnosis, it will even suggest a diagnosis, but they can, of course, override it and say this, I think it's something else. But it just saves a huge amount of cognitive capability for a doctor to have that triage be happening. And when there's such a low ratio of physicians to population as in China, I don't know how you can really provide successful healthcare without something like that. Sadly, we don't have that yet in the United States. We thought it was a great achievement that we could actually talk to our doctor over the telephone or Zoom during COVID, and even that may go away now. But we really, I think, could benefit from an intelligent telemedicine system.
Yeah, let me pick up on what Tom said, that exact same story, and just sort of unravel a little bit of the nuance about it. So as Tom said, this front end helps triage. Are you here because of our vitamin promotion, or are you here because you have a clinical thing? And then it does a triage on, is this something emergency? Like, is this something we shouldn't be even talking about because you better get yourself in an ambulance or to some like emergency ward as soon as possible? So it does that right up front. And then it says, or basically leads you through a series of questions, like a tree structure on, is this something standard and simple? Or it's something non-emergency, but a little more complicated. Now, coming back to the issue of cognitive overload, this one has some subtlety to it in sort of some interesting ways. Because on one hand, the doctor's multitasking. The doctor isn't just shutting themselves off from all patients and thinking about you for a half hour. The doctor is actually handling multiple of these input streams with the help of the AI-based system. But what happens is the AI system makes recommendations based on the description of the symptoms and then provides a list. So the doctor isn't starting from scratch. So this part of it very much helps with the cognitive overload because you're not like generating the diagnostic tree from scratch. You're looking at a set of possibilities, right? Now, sometimes the thing that might be the real thing might not even be there, but most of the time it is, right? So it's this sort of duality that the doctor's multitasking, handling multiple patients at once, yet for each patient, there's this tremendous recommendation support tool on what to do. So like, is it net more or less cognitive overloading? I can't say, but it's this duality of these things happening in parallel. And the other thing that the person did share when we did the interview was that the amount of time spent on patients per doctor went up substantially just because so much of the you must do administrative paperwork, fill out the check boxes, what happened during the interaction is all digitally captured. So that's the point, which is true in all of these. It's not just the AI, it's the digitalization of the workflow, the systemization of the workflow, bringing model-based approaches. The AI plays the role, right? Be it a prediction, a recommendation, an optimization, but it's the digital workflow in combination with all of this. So the AI project is always a lot more than the AI.
Yeah, so what you're highlighting there is how once you've digitized everything, you can have the machine employee, the AI, has got something to read. It's that there's so much knowledge readable by machine that machine can process that a human was burdened with, either on the input side or the output side.
That ability to ingest every medical article, written in the last N years or however many days or months recent, isn't necessarily in your database that you have validated, that you feel is trustworthy to use. So even though you say what you said and it's true, it's a very slow, gradual process to, in a reliable way, work that into the production tool. Because Tom's done some work with medical applications, and I've just done some very in-depth studies. While everybody wants improvements, clinicians do not want their everyday workflow changing so fast because they calibrate to how a recommendation tool will use. Now, if you sort of keep changing that model on a daily or weekly basis, it's very disoriented. So yes, that new knowledge could come in, but you've got to gate the process. And you've got to gate the transition so people can assimilate and absorb the change.
Well, yes. I was literally just thinking about, the checkbox, the actual data, the inputs to the medical record from the patient. But I understand what you're saying, and I think that's a fascinating point as well. That it's sort of the flip side of the cognitive load. If you fill up the model with things that people don't understand, that's a sort of grossly oversimplified way of talking about it. But the way you described it, that people have to calibrate to that. They have to calibrate their own workflow. They have to assimilate what it means for them. There's this layer of meaning that you're touching on, this layer of relevance, this layer of I'd like to check that. That's almost a different way of thinking about personalization. Sort of a flip side on the output side, the use side. that I hadn't thought of before.
One of the things that you touch on in the book is, and it's not central to the narrative of your case studies, but I still think it's helpful to put it in the history, is this sort of progression of analysis of how people think about how AI will affect jobs. I think it was in sort of the 2015 era, that first Oxford report and the McKinsey report, and they all came out saying that 40 to 50% of jobs are going to be, augmented away or automated away. It was basically a job elimination. And then there was sort of a little evolution there. And a tangent is actually in that sort of 2016 timeframe, we actually did our own analysis based on U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data to actually sort of check that, because we went, that doesn't make sense. These jobs, there's too many things that an AI can't actually do, and came up with much more of a very small percentage of jobs could be automated away, but a lot could have some sort of augmentation, some sort of interaction. But I'm curious, when you think about that history of how people have thought about, this first narrative of, AI is going to eliminate jobs, to, well, maybe not, maybe AI is actually just going to be involved in a lot of jobs. When you look through all of these case studies, which are now set several years later, right? So we're seeing the evidence of those predictions. How do you think about putting the overall context of how people should think about AI in their own employment or in the employment of their people? If you're talking to CEOs about how to think about jobs in their company, do you have any new reflections based on this set of case studies that you've created in this book?
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think from the case studies themselves, we certainly came away with a feeling that augmentation was not only generally a better idea than large-scale automation, and I think Steve can talk a little bit about why. He's done some extra research in that space, but far more common and likely, and I guess easier for organizations to adopt. And I don't really think that that's changed, although the other thing that we have now is an environment where nobody seems to be able to find enough workers. I was talking yesterday to somebody in the Netherlands. They can't find enough. Then later to Canada, they can't find enough. Australia, a couple of weeks ago, they can't find enough. So I think we could probably end up automating some jobs and still have plenty of open positions to fill. So I think, we may see more of that. There are some of the vendors of AI and automation systems are starting to talk about digital workers in a way that they haven't previously. Everybody was sort of adhering to we just free up humans to do other things. Now we can replace humans, and by the way, you probably don't have any humans to replace, so you better hire a digital worker to do this particular job. So I think it's always going to be based on the economy and the need for productivity and what particular demography, I guess, what workers, potential workers want to do. But all we can really do, I think, is prepare ourselves for a future, as you say, in which we're likely to be working with a machine. And I had written an article previously with a radiologist in the Boston area who also has a PhD in AI. He's done a lot of work with the American College of Radiologists on using AI in that profession. And he said, and I've sort of stolen his line, we used it in the article, the only radiologists who are going to lose their jobs to AI are those who refuse to work with AI. And I think that's true of basically every field.
Many professions. Yeah. Dave, you, in a way, gave us a mini sense of history. You referred to in the book where we said something about predictions in 2015 and some updates. Actually, I think in the very beginning of the introduction, and this was Tom's idea, there was a sentence about going back to Queen Anne or one of the English monarchs who it was sometime in the 1500s turned down a patent because of the fear of what more automated knitting machines would do to employment. In those years, it would have been a very, very early type of automation. Obviously, in the UK, where that happened, there's more employment now than there was in 1500. So obviously, even though there's much more automation, there's much more work and much more new work. All right. So this thing we're going through about AI and the impacts of jobs, if you go back to 1948 and the incredible popularity of Norbert Wiener's book on cybernetics, that was the first of the modern era, sort of widespread, publicly accessible thing that we have intelligent machines. And it was coming out of technology in World War II, even before, it was in the very early days of the computer, but it was like a fire control radar. But this notion of adaptive machines, all right? In the early 1960s in the United States, the Johnson administration convened a special panel because there was such a concern about how computerization would result in widespread job displacement. This was in 1963, something like that. Now, has there been various types of job displacement as a result of computerization? Of course there has been. All right. Has there been occupational shifts, in the occupational profile from 1940 to, 2020? Of course there has. But are there more jobs than ever? Yes. All right. So the issue is probably not going to be on the number of jobs. The issue is probably going to be more subtle about changes in the shift of the occupational profiles. And the thing people are especially concerned on are changes in the shift of the income distribution profiles. It turns out one of the things that just comes out loud and clear from the economists who specialize in looking at this thing is in recent decades, computerization, this was even before the impacts of AI, fantastically amplified the productivity of highly educated, highly paid professionals and managers. More routine types of production workers, a certain subset of clerical workers, those numbers have actually not decreased in net, but the proportion has dramatically decreased, right? And then there's been this huge increase on, like gig economy, Uber driver, nail polish technicians. Not all of those, but a lot of those jobs are, I wouldn't say impervious to automation, but have not been impacted, and the proportions have grown, but the wages are not so great. They're not good jobs. You know what I mean? They're not high quality jobs. So this issue is, once again, we're repeating this cycle. So the question people ask is, well, isn't AI a more general purpose amplification of computing than we've ever had before? So maybe even though we've been through this cycle many, many times before, of course, some jobs get displaced. Of course, some existing jobs get augmented and amplified, and a lot of new things become possible. New work tends to be very labor intensive, a la installing the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging, a la putting solar panels on rooftops all over, the place. New work, new tasks, new industries tend to be very labor intensive. The automation often goes into things that have stabilized, right? And, you're more familiar. So there's going to be this dynamic interplay. No one knows how it plays out. And I think one of the biggest insights from the professional economists who study this is not a matter to be predicted. It's not as if the truth is out there and it's whether you're better than the other person in predicting it. The way this plays out on whether we use automation mostly for displacement or whether we use it to create opportunities through augmentation and more people share in the proceeds of the productivity, is not a technology issue. It's government policies, it's tax policies, it's incentives, it's the imagination or lack thereof of every individual group on the ground, any company. If Tom mentioned so-so automation, I'm going to wrap this up, but if people are lazy and just say, let's just get the head count out, then the bad stuff happens. If people say, okay, even if we automate and displace, we're going to redeploy. Even if we automate and displace, we're going to recycle that capacity because there's a lot of new things we need to do, or there's a lot of exceptions we need to handle. You know what I mean? So this is all a human choice.
I remember you once saying that the idea that we can just automate away humans implies that we've solved all of humanity's problems.
Yeah, it just seemed absurd to me.
There are way more problems for us to solve,
I mean,
and exactly what you're saying. At a company level, society level, there's too many other things for us to go do.
Yeah. As David Deutsch says, problems are inevitable. The problems are inevitable. More will come at us, and it's the humans that make those creative and leaps and those leaps of imagination.
And new problems are unfamiliar, which by definition are hard to automate. And yet augmentation is especially powerful for like amplifying what scientists can do, amplifying what policy planners can do.
I have to ask, do you guys have a perspective on the universal basic income debate coming out of this?
It's a bit early for that, since, as we say, there's no shortage of jobs today. What we do have is a shortage of people to perform them. I don't see it happening broadly within the United States based on, anything like our current politics. I could see it happening in some other places in the world, and if there's a need for it, I suspect some of those other places will implement it. But we seem a long way from that in the U.S. today.
I'll tell you why. I'm not a professional in this area. I can't say, but I'll tell you why I don't think it's going to happen. Because when we think of automation and displacement, we think of automation and displacement of the work we do today. And that same economist who put the quote on the back of our book cover worked with a team of people from several organizations. And they looked at employment in 1940, and they looked at employment in 2018. All right, so essentially concurrently. And without going into the detail, here is the salient point. They said, let's take all of the detailed job occupations that were in the census as of the year 1940. Now let's look at the detailed employment in 2018 and see what now obviously this requires some estimation and some approximations, but let's assume they do those approximations better than anyone else. They say, what fraction of those jobs are in occupations that were previously in the 1940 census, and what fraction were in what they'll call new job titles, as defined by additions to the census in the ensuing years. And it turned out that 63% of the total employment in 2018 was, at least by their approximation, in detailed job titles that were not in the 1940 census. So we think about automation of what is, and we forget that so much of employment growth are in things that we didn't do before.
That sort of asymmetry where we can't imagine.
Exactly. So
yeah. You can imagine what's going to go, but we can't imagine what's going to come.
Exactly. That's what dominates the nature of these discussions. And you talked about cognitive load, because the cognitive load of understanding the existing that could be phased out is much easier than what's going to happen, but we don't even know yet.
Yeah, and I think that one of the points that you made really early on in this interview it speaks to a very simple example of why there's still going to be plenty of jobs, and that's financial planners becoming sports recommenders, forecasters. that every time you move a frontier, humans find the next one.
Find something new.
And it's not what you necessarily predict it's going to be. And one other thought that I had about the doctor coming to the digitization of medical of recommendations coming to the US. I'm thinking of what Edward Tufte and Eric Topol have got in Tufte's latest book, that when you put all those recommendations in front of an American doctor, what will they do? Order more tests, because that covers their ass, basically. So there's just so many different outcomes that you don't necessarily anticipate.
In that frame, I'd like to thank you both for joining us and talking with us about this, and thank you for writing this book, because I think that exactly what we've just sort of concluded with and what Helen said is having these stories deeply researched and written is incredibly valuable, because it's so hard to think over an entire society, over huge technological change, and imagine the future. From just a top-down perspective, but having a collection of true stories of how things have actually progressed to this date are incredibly valuable for people who are trying to imagine the future. And so from our view as human-centered designers, this kind of collection is extraordinarily helpful to see how these things have actually progressed with real people in real time. So thank you very much. It's been a great conversation, and it's a great book to have on our shelf.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Solid state.